I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. It's the final mock draft Monday of the season as the draft is this week. We'll go over that, my top 100 big board, and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 back, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, everyone. We hope you had a great weekend because now it is NFL draft week. We'll get to mock draft Monday in the final segment as normal. That will be our final mock draft Monday of the season, but we will be getting you ready for the draft all week long. And as I have been promising, as I've been talking about, I finally have my top 100 big board. I'm working on a way to fully display it somewhere for you all because it's just 100 is a lot to list in one screenshot. But what we're going to do in this show is we're going to go over some of my top prospects in the first round and then also where guys fall in the second round as far as what the Steelers' priorities should be. And I look at the situation here and I see a top 100 big board here with, if you're just looking at how the top 19 picks could play out before the Steelers, I think there are legitimately, when I look at and compare all the prospects, there are so many great options for the Steelers for them to miss at 20th overall if they stand pat. This is why I lean against trading up in this year's draft class, because I truly think that there are too many players that I think would be completely worth the 20th overall pick to the Steelers right now to pass up if they fall down to the Steelers. And one thing to account for when you're doing mock drafts, when we're predicting who's going to go where and there's always going to be things that catch you off guard. There's always going to be the random team that takes Cleveland Farrell in the top 10. There's always going to be a random team that, reaches for a quarterback or, picks a player that you didn't have on your board at all. I mean, heck, the Steelers have been that team sometimes, right? Like when they drafted Terrell Edmonds, no one had them doing that in the first round. But I think that there's, even if you account for that, the Steelers are going to probably get a premier player at a position that's a major opportunity for them to upgrade a position of high value in the NFL. And to show you guys what I'm talking about, one, I want to show you just the top 32 players on my big board now. If you're listening on your podcasting app, I'll walk through you best as possible. If you're looking here on YouTube, I apologize for not being like zoomed in so you could look really closely, but I hope you can kind of see the names here. I've color coded each player with a key that has like different labels on it. So if I think they're not going to be in any position to draft that player, they're in red, they're in blue if I think they require a trade up, they're green if they're a top 30 visit, they're yellow if they were if the team was in contact with them at another place, whether it was their pro day, the combine, etc., but they weren't a top 30 visit, and then they're orange if I just don't see their position of being one that the Steelers are actually going to look at, primarily, of course, tight end, edge rusher, running back, those positions. And they're white if their team just had no contact with them at all, and they might fall into their range. Anyways, looking at these players, I'm ruling out the top three quarterbacks. I'm ruling out Joe Alt as the top offensive tackle. I'm also ruling out Malik Neighbors. I'm not ruling out Rome Odunze because even though I have him as my fourth best guy on this list here, I have Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., then Jaden Daniels, then Rome Odunze, then Malik Neighbors, then Drake May, then Joe Alt at number 7. But I have Odunze ranked there because I do think Rome Odunze can be potentially the best receiver in football someday if he grows in the right way. I also think that he's a locker room leader, which is something the Steelers value, and that's why I put him just above Malik Neighbors. But And with the Steelers talking to him at the combine, I do think that they're interested in him. And it just depends on, even though I'm saying he's my fourth best, I don't think he'll go fourth overall, nor do I think he'll go fifth overall. I think that he might go, I think there's a good chance he goes to the Giants at 6. And if he doesn't go there, he'll go somewhere at the bottom of the top 10. But if he fell out of the top 10, I do think that would be someone the Steelers would be like, you know what? I know we said offensive line, but we could go get this guy and then have maybe the best, one of the best 1-2 punch at wide receivers at Pickens and Adunze in the NFL. But if you look at this list here and you're going down to where guys are at leading up to 20. I have my 20th ranked prospect is Graham Barton, the versatile offensive lineman who can play center from Duke. Above him, I do have all 6 of the tackles we've talked about. I have Amarius Mims at 17th overall, J.C. Latham at 15, Troy Latano at 14, Talise Fuago at 9, Olu Fashanu 8, and Joe Alt at 7. So all the tackles, and then you have corners like Quinion Mitchell's at 10, Terrion Arnold's at 12, and then Cooper DeJean at 18. But you look at that, and then the guys like Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle at 19 there, a couple other edge rushers, and Brock Bowers is mixed in to get you to 19. But when you look at what the situation is, I think that there is no way the Steelers come out of this first round if they stand pat at 20 and they take a position like the top player at one of those positions that are primary positions of value in the NFL, that being tackle, corner, wide receiver. And even those, and I think here's the thing: center ends up being the position where if all those positions of value are rated before the Steelers, and that's the position that's left to you, then all right, well maybe Graham Barton is worth the pick right there, or maybe you trade back and see if you can get something else there. But I truly think what's going to happen is that there's too many good things that can happen for the Steelers to say that there's going to be a terrible bad case scenario. And part of this was an experiment that my buddy Brian Batko did for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which he, a couple weeks back, he did, the best case scenario. This past weekend, he did the worst case scenario. We talked about that on the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. So go listen to that if you haven't already. But in his scenario, he went through and he said, like, hey, let's just say the board breaks in all the worst ways for the Steelers. And in his scenario, the top 6 offensive tackles all off the board. The top 2 centers both off the board. I think that the top 3 receivers were gone. Even a couple corners were gone. So like there was a run of all these prime positions. And even in that situation, guys like Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle out of Texas, guys like Terrion Arnold, the cornerback out of Alabama, Cooper DeJean, Adonai Mitchell, all those guys were still available to the Steelers at 20th overall in that situation. Zach Frazier's still there for later at some point. And that's where I just look at the situation again with my top 30 big board. There aren't just 19 players that if the Steelers just run out of picks here, if the other teams just pick exactly who the Steelers need, and it takes all those players off the board, that the Steelers look at 20 and say, man, there's nobody here who we could draft right now that would bring us great value and also be a player worthy of the 20th overall pick. I truly believe that. I think that's again, it's why Steelers fans should be excited right now, because I think the Steelers are in a very good position to do this. And again, it doesn't mean they shouldn't trade back if the board breaks a certain way and they think they can get better, a better fit down the line somewhere. And I want to talk about the second round options too after this, but I look at the way that the board could break in a lot of ways. And, in Brian's scenario, he accounted for 4 quarterbacks being drafted. We've talked about it. There's a chance that there could be 5 or even 6 quarterbacks drafted before the Steelers pick. And if there's 5 picks that are quarterbacks, and that means J.J. McCarthy and either Bo Nix or Michael Penix were also selected in the first round, that just again means, so if you take 5 quarterbacks, that's 5 picks out of 19. And then let's say you take all 6 offensive tackles. That's 11 picks just at tackle and quarterback. That doesn't even count the 3 wide receivers that would probably go. That puts you at 14. You'll probably have a defensive tackle, a couple edge rushers. There's going to be a position that is just wide open for the taking for the Steelers at a really good spot there. And again, it helps that there's so many first round graded offensive tackles who I think all fit in the top 20 rankings here, as we've said here. So that being said, again, I think the Steelers are in too good of a position to miss if they stay at 20 in the first round. And that's not to say that, guys who are picked in the top 20 won't be busts this year, but it's saying that as far as the value, as far as what we understand these guys to be, the value of on tape, their relative athletic score, their the profile that we know of them, as leaders and such, I don't think that there are guys that you would come out of this draft and just say, hey, you know what, that was the reach. If they stick to, even the top 25, I'd say, of my big board here, that I've put together. But I want to talk about however this plays out, how that plays into what the second round strategy is. We'll do that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the number one sportsbook in America. And with it being playoff time in the NBA and the NHL, with baseball also in full swing, there's no better time to get in on the action at FanDuel, your number one sportsbook, and place a bet on every game. Right now, new customers, when they sign up for FanDuel, they'll get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed with their first bet, win or lose. That's $150 to use on point spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. You can bet on everything from slap shots in the NHL to home runs in MLB and slam dunks in the NBA playoffs. All in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and you can make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed from FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. We're also brought to you by Monopoly Go, the amazing mobile game you got to download to your phone right now. I've been told I'm a competitive person, and well, that all stems back to our family game nights back when I was growing up. We had all sorts of different favorites, but Monopoly was always the Super Bowl in the family. Whenever I won that, I felt like I was carrying around the championship belt around the house all week. And now I can carry my championship belt every single day when I play Monopoly Go. Again, Monopoly Go is a mobile game you can download right to your phone, and you'd be adding to a large number of people playing this game because it's already been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a new twist on Monopoly where you play on hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, build up your own cities, and bring in big money. And the best part, I can still beat up my family and friends in this game, and it's a lot of fun to do so. I can charge them for rent at iconic properties like Boardwalk on Monopoly, or I can heist my friends' vaults and keep getting my money up so I can rise up the Monopoly leaderboards. Get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here to talk about what the Steelers' options are. So let's go over some of the things that we've discussed so far, as the top guys being available, and compare it to how they can get what they really want in the second round. And it all is set up by what's going to happen in the first round, right? Because center is a priority in this draft. Me keep talking about offensive tackle and corner, wide receiver. That does not mean that I don't think center is important. But what I'm saying to you is that from what I'm understanding about how the Steelers front office is looking right now, they're looking at the positions that in today's analytical football world are being evaluated as the primary positions of importance to building a roster, as far as the cornerstones of doing so, and adding that into their consideration of how to build their big boards more so than they were before in previous years. And so that means center isn't as much of a priority, but it is still a priority. And I want people to understand there is a middle ground here to people that think that, they don't think that center is important. They do. But they also acknowledge that, hey, when you got 6 guys that kind of grade out to be the type of offensive tackles who, if in a normal year, would all probably, each of which could probably be graded as a top 10 player in an NFL draft, that is huge. And that is something that you have to account for. And again, if you look at my big board, I have 3 offensive tackles in my top 10 players. All 6 offensive tackles are in my top 17. So that's the value of which I see this playing out there. And so let's say the Steelers get that tackle, or, like I said, let's say Terry Arnold falls to the Steelers at 20, and you're like, well, we can't pass up on a guy who could potentially be the best cornerback in this class, right? And then they're sitting there and they're saying, what are we going to do about the center position? Well, if you look at my big board rankings, this is you'll kind of see why there is such a rush to try to. There's a lot of people saying you want to get center in the first round because they're not sure if you're going to be able to get it with a natural second round pick at 51st overall. At least on my big board, I have if you're just accounting for centers, I have Graham Barton at 20, I have Jackson Bowers Johnson at 26, and I have Zach Frazier at 29, and these are overall. So all those guys, like, I'm saying that, like, you get to the bottom of the first round, you could be drafting them for great value for where I think that they are in this draft class overall. And that's where I think the Steelers could be in a situation where that could come back to bite them if they stay pat at 20 and then they have to find a way to move up in the second round. And we'll get to more on that. And I think that that's where things could be really interesting, is if the Steelers are in a position where, let's say, they get the offensive tackle of their dreams, the corner of their dreams. They need to make sure that center is achieved in this draft class, because they did not address it before. And I don't think they want to try to go for retreads of Mason Cole or try to move James Daniels over to center. Go get yourself a young center who can grow in your offense, can be an anchor on that line with Broderick Jones for the long term. And if you got another offensive tackle who can also be an anchor, then you have, let's say a Fuaga, a Broderick Jones, and then let's say a Zach Frazier or whoever on those lists. And now you have the makings of the future of your offensive line that can be a dominant unit for years to come. That's why I think that when you're talking about in the second round, if they get a tackle or a corner or one of those other positions, center becomes the priority, and they're in a perfect position because they have 2 third-round picks to do so. And we'll go over some scenarios for that because the winner of this week's Mock Draft Monday did just that. And I want to, so if you did that, you might know, like, hey, I might have a shot at winning this week because Chris is giving me a shout out there. But we'll get to that in a minute. But here's the other situation. Let's say in this scenario, the Steelers get the center in the first round. Let's say the worst case scenario to get anything but a center. Let's say all 4 corners are taken, 6 offensive tackles are taken, all the top receivers are taken. And so then all of a sudden it's just like, you know what? Graham Barton is just the best player available here. We're just going to go with him. That puts you in a situation where you don't have to trade up, because then I think that then you're going to be in a position in the second round to kind of get who you want to get at those positions. And there's a lot of players of great value who I think could end up being in the second round. And again, we're also talking about in a position where the Steelers might be aided by the fact that more quarterbacks are getting drafted ahead of them. And, as you probably, if you looked throughout that list of players I had there, there were only the 3 quarterbacks at the top. I don't have JJ McCarthy as as a top 32 player on my board, even though I think he will go top 12 in this draft class, just based off of where I've seen people value him. But as far as, an overall prospect, I have him ranked 39th, so he's not even on the screen right here when I'm cutting it off at 32. By the way, I do love Braden Fisk, and I think that if you can get Braden Fisk in this draft class, it would make the Steelers defensive line monsters for years to come between him and Keanu Benton. And you still have Cam Hayward and Larry Ogunjobi as the veterans who can lead the way for that group. But point being, I look around, I see all these options here. If they don't get a center in the first round, I don't think it would be too pressed to trade up in the second round to get your center. But let's say you get a center in the first round, I think you're still going to have plenty of awesome prospects at several key positions of need that would make this a very interesting draft process. So there's a lot to still break down here and to go over things. I'll show you guys more of my big board as we go throughout the week and we start getting closer to actual draft day, because I do think that it's important to explore all the angles and be prepared for the different stages that we will hit in the draft, because let's face it, there's always moving parts. And also a reminder, this is a different front office for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Some people are going to say, like, it's just going to be a normal draft day. Some guys are going to get picked. And then I think the Steelers could very well make multiple trades on this draft day and trades up, trade down, wherever. I think that they're going to be very active. They have 2 third-round picks. They have 2 sixth-round picks. They'll be trying to parlay some of those into getting the situations that they want to make sure that their roster is going to be set up, and they don't have to do too much free agency work after the draft. So all that being said, let's get to the Mock Draft Monday winner for this week and the final Mock Draft Monday winner of the season. We'll do that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you can download right to your phone to get tickets to your favorite events without it being a stressful endeavor to do so. You can also go to the website gametime.co. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. You get killer deals on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, so you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, and so many more events. If you're in Pittsburgh, Game Time is giving great prices on a lot of different things, including the return of Far Side, the rap group that's coming back to town. They also have great tickets for Pirates games going right now. The Buccos are on a bit of a slide, but hey, maybe you can be part of the fan base that shakes them out of it and gets them back to their winning ways. But they also have Kenny Chesney, who's coming to town this summer, and a ton of other events. Be sure to go check out all the events that are in Pittsburgh on the Game Time app. And the Game Time app's best price guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here today with Mock Draft Monday, and this is the final Mock Draft Monday of the season. Shout out to everyone who always makes this so hard by submitting so many mock drafts. That's not a knock or me dissing anyone. That's just I'm always impressed by how many people take such interest into the show and take such interest into doing the mock draft and playing the kind of game that we do with that. It's a lot of fun doing that with you guys. And it's a lot of fun reading through all the picks and the different ideas with the trades and everything. But this week's rule was just being realistic and being saying what you think will actually happen. Give your best prediction here for what the Steelers are going to do. And I think it's actually pretty funny because this person who submitted it was very, very close to what I did recently in a mock draft of when I was trying to take into account what I think would make a lot of sense and be the most likely thing to happen here. But without any further ado, our winner this week is Zach B from Twitter, who submitted his picks, and his picks included a theme that we were just talking about. He went and got his offensive tackle in the first round at 20th overall, Marius Mims. No problems there. Get your guy to Georgia. But then he made sure to trade with the Titans to move up to the 38th overall pick, and he was able to get Zach Frazier with that, the center out of West Virginia. He also gave up the 98th overall pick, so the Steelers lose their third-round pick, one of their third-round picks there. But that's a price that I think you'd be willing to pay to get 2 premier offensive linemen in this class that can add to your line quickly, and then you can start developing one of the best offensive lines in football. But then after that, he went and got Jalen McMillan, who's a good receiver in this class. I think could be a solid number 2 behind George Pickens. And then he went and got Tyke Smith, the safety out of Georgia, who had a great Senior Bowl. And I've said for a while, I think he'd be just a great nickelback type option who can be a little physical, help in different facets, but he would be great in man coverage shadowing guys. I think that's where Tyke Smith comes in. Then he gets 2 other players, defensive lineman Christian Boyd of Northern Iowa, and a linebacker, Jalen Ford, out of Texas there. So shout out to Zach, because I think this draft class hits on a lot of things. But I want to show you a recent mock that I was just doing on a simulator, and I was just trying to think, the Steelers need to prioritize getting the offensive tackle position solidified, but they also need to prioritize the center, and they also need to get a wide receiver. And there's a lot of different things they have to achieve. So in a very similar fashion, I did a mock draft, and it was very similar in the picks that just happened here. When you looked at Zach's picks, 20th overall, Marius Mims. It seems like that's becoming more and more the pick that everyone's talking about. Zach Frazier. Then I traded with the Washington Commanders. I got the 36th overall pick for giving up the 51st and the 98th. So kind of similar. In the moves there between the Titans and the Commanders. But then, with the 36th overall pick, go and get Zach Frazier. I went and got a receiver, Johnny Wilson, out of Florida State in the 3rd round. And then in the 4th round, Tyke Smith as well. Great minds think alike, Zach, because again, I think his slot coverage ability would be a huge boost to the team, and he could bring something else there. 6th round picks, you got Kalen King, the cornerback out of Penn State, another young corner you can add to the mix. And I think that could be very helpful. And then you have Darius Muasau, linebacker out of UCLA, as the final 6th round pick of that draft class in my mock. But again, that's just my mock. That's where I see things playing out. That's the fun thing about mocks, y'all. All it is just experiments as far as which way things could go. How would you feel if it broke this way? And continuing to explore those options there. So all that being said, I do think that this is that I think what the Steelers are setting up to do is drafting an offensive tackle in the 1st round, maybe a corner, maybe a top flight wide receiver, and then getting into the 2nd round and making sure you do everything you can in your power to get one of these centers that Mike Tomlin thinks can be a plug and play, start day one type of guy in the NFL, because they desperately need to find that position, but they don't want to overdraft it. And that is why we keep saying, I don't think they're going to draft it. I don't think that they're going to chase down the center position too hard in the 1st round, unless again, something works out in a way where that's the only position left, because there was a run at tackle and corner and wide receiver and everything else. So I look at the situation for the Steelers, like in the 1st round, I think they have a really good spot. I think in the 2nd round, they have options based off of what happens in the 1st round. And I think that it's a good place to be if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. As I said last week, I talked about there being a smokescreen around what their true interest is. And part of that, is because there are holes, but part of it's also because the Steelers just haven't zeroed in on one guy the way that they have in some years and made it obvious, hey, that's going to be the guy. And if they have, maybe I missed that, but I don't think they have yet. I think they're trying not to do stuff like that. But I also think that the Steelers have to come out and I think hit the ground running with what they're trying to build with their group this year. I think they need some tone setters. That's why they got Russell Wilson on offense, Patrick Queen on defense. I think they need guys that are leaders that can help. The defense was devoid of leadership talent. So defense is kind of fine, but it's mainly on offense. They need to find that. And if you could find 2 really good rookie offensive linemen that add to your line right away, and they start building the new culture with the team, that could be perfect for what you're setting up here. So again, offensive tackle, center, those I think are if you're ideal for the Steelers right now, I think that you're trying to make those the first 2 picks of the draft there, the first 2 picks of the draft for the Steelers there, so that they can get their offensive line fixed, become a run dominant team again. And then that starts to set the stage for what comes next year as the Steelers are trying to make even bigger moves. But don't be shocked about Omar Khan, because he's made some big moves already, and it's barely been, it's been here a year, but I think that Omar Khan and this front office, they've got some plans cooking that's going to surprise us all, and it's going to get a lot of people talking about what's going to actually happen here in this draft class. But I'm your host, Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.